It's crazy. And it feels good.
Oh, excuse me. My bad. Excuse me.
Start to see more people roll in the back. All right, let's pray. God, we love you and we thank you for this night, God, to be in your house. Lord, again, to journey to Easter, God, think about that, the price that you would pay, God. We're excited, Lord, that we get to take part. Lord, and I pray, Lord, tonight, Lord, as we worship you, Lord, that we would sense heaven, God, and it would come down. And it would just fill this room, and it would just engulf us, God, with your love and with your patience and with your kindness. And Lord, that our voices would rise up to heaven. And just, Lord, that you would incorporate our praise, God. And then, Lord, if there's anything in our lives that needs to be brought to the altar, we would take advantage of the worship time to bring those things to the altar, God, and lay them out before you, God, and give our lives to you, God. And align the things that need to be lined up and to put away the things that need to be put away, God. So, God, I just humbly thank you for this night. In your name I pray. Amen.
Our fight is with weapons unseen. Your enemies crash to their knees as we rise up in worship. When trials unleash like a flood, the battle belongs to our God as we cry out in worship. The victory is yours. You're riding on the storm. Your name is unveiled. victory is yours. You're writing all that store. Your name is unfailing. Though kingdoms rise and fall, your throne will stand secure. Your name is unshaken. No place
so open to receive what you want to say, because I really believe that you're saying things to us all the time, but we have to turn our ears on and listen. Help us to be quiet enough to hear it tonight, God. So thank you for this moment that we've had to worship together, God, this midweek celebration of who you are, God. I pray it just builds from here to Sunday, God, and if people are in captivity, God, that they be set free tonight, God, because you got more for their life. You got good plans for your children, God. In your name I pray. Amen. Adults can be seated. Everyone else can be dismissed. Still a bunch in here. How about that?
Matt.
Yes, sir.
Quicker.
Yeah, that's right. Praise God. I do want to tell you, a week from this Sunday, it'll actually be Palm Sunday. We're going to do a baptism in the 9:30 and in the 11 that day. So we're going to have one there, and possibly one even next Wednesday or the Wednesday after that. So if anybody's interested in baptism, get with us and let us know. But we have 3 already right now that we're going to do. And so excited about hearing Randy tonight. I guess, Randy, this is your first time this year to teach, because we did the men's series, and it took up most of the year. But excited to hear Randy and continuing on our journey to Easter. Remember that we'll have this Wednesday night, and then next Wednesday night, Kedra will teach, and then we won't have the next Wednesday night, we'll have a Good Friday service. So we're excited about that, and that's going to be pretty special too. So give Randy your attention. Give him a round of applause to get him fired up.
It is always good to get the applause before the message. I'll hear it. Oh, I'm not. So I had to pull out my notes because I need notes. So I know we typically, Wednesday nights are probably not like tonight is going to be. So I'm not going to apologize for that until afterwards, maybe. This particular kind of thing, more of a study, causes some people to check out really quickly because you're just not, it just doesn't appeal to you. If Karen were here, she'd be gone in the first 3 minutes. Check that out. This is not her thing. Speaking of Karen, y'all continue to keep their family in your prayers, okay? They're struggling with their mom, and it's been difficult. All right, Matt. Which button?
Bottom, down is forward. That is.
Oh, that's it, yeah. Hey, look at that. Cool. All right. All right, so this is not going to be necessarily a Bible study. I want us to go a little bit further back than that. And I have my props. These are props. But what I wanted to do, I was inspired. I was really inspired last. That's Matthew right there. No, it's good. It's good. One more. This is good. That's right. So like I say, the Bible wasn't really even assembled till like the 4th century, right? So we're not going to be talking about the Bible tonight. That doesn't mean we won't be talking about things contained in the book. Who has your Bible with you? That book that we hold up, that was actually assembled. It wasn't written. It's somebody actually, when the Bible was written, telling them that's a mouthful. The Bible was assembled. A lot of different things, and these are my props I'm going to show you. And what I wanted to do, kind of inspired by Matt last week and him diving a little bit deeper into Bible study, I thought I'd give that a shot tonight and see. If y'all don't particularly care for this kind of stuff, then I apologize. You hit us the wrong night. So what I want to do is kind of take a look at the resurrection of Jesus. And more, y'all know what apologetics is. It's just, I'm not going to explain it to you. I'm just going to do it kind of that way, all right? Consider the idea that not all scholars agree on everything that's contained in that book. And that doesn't bother me that they don't agree. It doesn't matter to me. But what I want to do is take the things that we have that scholars do agree on, and let's talk about that. Let's talk about the resurrection of Jesus. The resurrection of Jesus is the premier, primary, most important event of our Christian faith. And I say that because that event launched the church. There weren't any, this may be drastic, but I don't know if there were any Christians prior to that. As a matter of fact, there were very few people who followed Jesus, the Son of God, until then, right? There were only a couple of disciples that really even knew that had been revealed to them that he was the Son of God. They followed a priest. They followed the Messiah, the guy that they thought was going to lead Jerusalem back to promise. So they weren't really following the Son of God. So the church didn't really exist, the Christian church, until after the resurrection. When Jesus died, everybody was expecting Jesus to do what dead people do. And that is to stay what? Stay dead. No one was standing outside the tomb. On the third day, there wasn't a group. We had 10. None. 8. Cue the music. It just wasn't that way. Because nobody was expecting to find no body in the grave. They really weren't expecting that. So our Christian faith rises and falls on the resurrection and the truth and the significance of the resurrection. And there are a lot of people who would say, you know, and you may have come across this, and really this is the reason for what I'm doing tonight, is you and your faith and your walk may have come across people who said, you know, I know all about those stories, and I don't believe any of that resurrection stuff. It was just things that people said, and generation and family was passed down, and you know, it was hundreds of years before anything was written down, and by the time it got to the point where it was written down, it had blown completely out of proportion, and there was really no resurrection. Has anybody experienced that before? That is the main thing that people would say. And that's what I want to do, is I want us to be able to, if we're faced with that argument, to be able to say, well, let me explain something to you. All right? And tonight we're actually going to, and I'm going to do it as quickly as I can. I can tell I'm going slow. We want to be able to strike down that primary argument that's just a myth and a legend, that stories spoken over and over and over time. And then nothing was written down for hundreds of years. Right? And we're going to do it in a way of giving scholars, two kinds of scholars, theological scholars. There's believers and non-believers. Okay? They don't always agree. They rarely agree. But we're going to give the doubters, the unbelievers, the benefit of the doubt tonight. Okay? As hard as that's going to be for us, we're going to do it. We're going to do our best to give them the benefit of the doubt. Again, their ideas that the written accounts were just too far removed from the actual events to be accurate accounts of actual events. It's just a myth, it's a legend, it's a hearsay. Tonight you'll really have to stay close and focused for two reasons. One, it's the information that we're throwing out here, it kind of requires that you not drift. And the second thing is the presenter. Anytime someone's presenting it, that matters too. So you may have to hang on and see through some of my stumbles, right? So stay in real tight and try to, in your mind, let's get what he's trying to give us tonight. Again, two kinds of scholars. All scholars that are, it's hard to use the word all, they're worth their salt at all, agree that Jesus was a real historical figure. That they've all come to that conclusion. That's real. They all agree on that. We're going to stick with the things they agree on, right? So they all agree to that. They say that he was executed in Jerusalem 32, 33 AD. And this is consensus, okay? They all agree on that. We have available to us some documents, some manuscripts that we look at, that actually stories that tell us about the events of his life, Jesus' life. So, rather, since I don't have a Bible, I'm not using the Bible tonight, we'll talk about, again, this is a document, a manuscript that exists, probably a copy of the real thing, you know. AD, again, kind of off our timeline there. It's old. There's really no consensus on who actually wrote it, and that's Matthew. No consensus there. Those are actually closing. Anyway. Just in case, let's mute me. It doesn't need to be seen here. That's two of them, and these are the Gospels that you've heard. The Gospels that are contained in that leather-bound book that we call the Bible. This is the third one. We'll roll through this one. This was written by another anonymous person. It was written between 90 and 110 AD. Again, it's old. The scholars don't like the fact that it's old. They believe this author probably the same one wrote 3, possibly 4 other manuscripts and documents that were important enough to be contained and to be assembled into that Bible. The scholars they have a problem with this one, some of them, because it's as old as it is. And it says it's too much time passed down, in that stretch for it to be accurate. Now, that's their argument. I don't agree with them, but we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt sign. That one's gone. That's 3 of our 4. That leaves us with the one that we call Mark. Mark, it's really interesting that a lot of the theologians believe now that it was probably the earliest document, earliest manuscript. But the other scholars say, it wasn't decided that this was written between 66 and 70 AD, and that probably actually just about hits our timeline. It wasn't decided that until the 19th century. Old scholars say, before that it was considered to be just as old as these others. So they don't like the fact that it's there. So again, no consensus with that. So, Mark, that's all 4 of our Gospels that the scholars don't agree on. Is there enough evidence in it for us to say, no, wait a minute, I can have complete confidence of there was a resurrection? Is there enough evidence left if we take that into consideration? So, we got to talk about Paul. Paul was a man, again, that every single scholar agrees that Paul was a historical figure that lived in the 1st century. There's a lot of documentation, not necessarily what has been included here and in that leather-bound book. There are other people who wrote things that are historians from the day, one of them named Josephus, and they tell stories about it. And there's a lot of documentation that Paul really existed. He was in the 1st century. And we can have complete confidence in that. I mean, of all the things that the scholars have already ruled out, they said, okay, there's your one, Paul. We'll give you that. Paul existed. So right now, so far, we know that Jesus was real. Jesus was executed around 32, 33 AD, and Paul was real. He lived in the same century. So that's what we're going to hang our hat on today. Paul was a guy that, you guys here, most everybody knows about Paul. He wrote a lot of letters. That's the thing we know about Paul. He wrote 13 letters that we know of. He probably wrote a lot more. But we know that there's 13 that the scholars that I trust sat down and went through all the evidence and the preponderance of evidence and said, these 13 belong in that book. They're real, they're honest, they're about Paul. Guess how many the scholars agree on? 7. So we get rid of 6 of his letters. Okay. So wrong way. How many of you ever seen that word? I saw that word and I said, I got to put it up there. Pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha. Okay, Drew? How would you say it, brother? What the other scholars were saying was that there's 6 of those letters that they think, were probably written by someone else but put Paul's name on it because it made it seem more important and, things like that. And that's called pseudepigrapha. So they kicked out 6 of them. They kicked out 6. That leaves us 7. I've got to start looking at my notes a little closer now. Wrong way. This is harder than I thought. Here are the letters now this is a cool part. Now we're gradually proving some things here. Number 1, Jesus was real. All the scholars agree. Jesus was executed by the Romans. All the scholars agree with that. Paul was real and lived in the same 1st century as Jesus. Paul wrote, scholars agree, these 7 letters were written by that man Paul. They agreed that Paul was probably a Pharisee. And they agreed that he probably did persecute the early Christian church. And they also agreed that since these letters are attributed to him, he had an incredible change of heart. Somewhere down the line, right? So we're going to look at those. We just so happen to have one of them right here. I don't have a Bible, but I've got it in one of his letters. Cheesy, isn't it? And that's 1 Corinthians. So we're going to look at 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians was written in 55 AD. It hit our timeline. 55 AD. That's pretty good. Paul actually visited Corinth in 52. You see where I'm going? Now, he wrote the letter. So he went to Corinth, the city of Corinth, and he went to the city and he talked to them about Jesus in 52 AD. Right? 3 years later, he wrote them a letter after he had visited them. Okay? The letter was written in 55. He visited there in 52 AD. And what did he say? I forgot which one. What I was going to do in the extremely cheesy move was open this up and go to the 15th page, the first line. Actually, it's 1 Corinthians 15:1 is where we're going to start. And we're going to see what he said. He's writing them a letter, 52 AD. He was there in 55. He was there in 52. He's writing them a letter in 55. Now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you. Can you see why he's saying it like he's saying it? It's 3 years later. I'm going to write you a letter. And I want to remind you about what I preached to you. The gospel that I preached to you. Which you received, and on which you have taken your stand. For what I received, that's interesting. Now he's starting to tell them now about something that he actually had received, that someone else told him. So I believe it's within the scope of our investigation here to determine who it was that told him that, and when did that happen. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance. It's important, extremely, extremely important. It's the number one thing. It's primary in your walk. I want to let you know that. And that is that Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, like you would expect. That he was raised on the 3rd day, according to the Scriptures. Okay, it's time to pump the brakes. We've got a man that everybody agrees on, talking about another man that everybody agrees on that was persecuted and executed. And in 52 AD, a mere 20 years, now for you 20-year-olds, that sounds like a long time. For me, trust me, it does not sound like a long time. 20 years prior to this. Now, we've been told that this myth was built over decades and decades and decades. And the story blew up, and it didn't make sense, and so people added extra to it, and they increased it to the point where hundreds of years later, that suddenly now he's a resurrected person, and 20 years. I think that's significant. 20 years. That's not long. 20 years. 32, 33 AD, 52 AD. Now, he was raised on the 3rd day, according to the Scriptures. Okay, we talked about, this is before our Bible and documents. What Scriptures were we talking about here? Yeah, it's the Scriptures, the manuscripts from the Old Testament. And who would know that any better than Paul, right? So he understood it, according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas. Cephas, that's Peter. Peter really is kind of a nickname, right? It wasn't like a given name. His given name was Simon. Jesus called him the Rock, which is what Peter means. In Aramaic, guess what Cephas means? The Rock. In English, guess what the Rock means? Right. So he's talking to Peter. So that he was raised on the 3rd day, according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. Now, how did he know that? How did he know? And after that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom without them, right? We still can. We still can. Most of whom are still living. First person, let me tell you, how many of you here know what it's like to go to high school in Calhoun County in the 1940s? Have you ever talked to anybody that was at high school in the 1940s? So I can go to my mother, she can tell me. If I want to know what it was like, I can get a first-hand account. Do you think I can trust that? Oh, you better believe it. You know why I can trust it? I know more than just what she told me. I know who she is. I know how lucid and how sharp she still is to be almost 88. And I know that she's honest, and I know she's truthful. You see what I mean? When you go back and you look at evidence, you take all that into consideration. Who was it? What do they know? Can I trust them? And he's saying that he knows that let me go back. That he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas. He appeared to Peter. And then he appeared to the 12. How did we know? Oh, we're in. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time. This is a lot of information. This is not just resurrection information. This goes beyond that. And this is post-resurrection information. This is really good. I mean, it's detailed. Some are still living, though some have fallen asleep. I love that. So confident in their place that they didn't even call. You know, you see that all over the New Testament where the saints were just falling asleep because they knew they were going to stay asleep. If you're asleep, you're probably going to wake up. And they were confident. And they, after, oh, no, wait a minute. I've got to stop my feet. I'm going to get ahead of myself. So we're already getting into some information where Paul is talking, and this is in, what year was he doing this? He had dissed them, and he was telling them this in 52. Now, Paul, we know there's some other documentation that is legit and that we believe that says that this was not his first trip out. We know that he went to Cyprus. And when did he go to Cyprus and he taught the same thing in Cyprus? And after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas and stayed with him 15 days. I think I jumped over, let's see, there's my 44 AD. It's important to get these slides in the right order. 44 AD. We're creeping down more and more and more. 12 years. 12 measly years. How many of y'all have been alive 12 years, everybody? Everybody? How many of you can remember some things that went on 12 years ago? Everybody? Everybody? 12 years. This is a guy that all scholars agree on. You know how rare that is? For all scholars to agree on anything. And we're talking about things here where they all agree. They all agree on the people. So I really don't see how this could be a myth. So we see so far that in Undisputed Letters, let's talk about Cephas for a second. Paul, a while ago, when he was writing to the church in Corinth, he was telling all the post-resurrection things that happened, right? He was telling about how that Jesus appeared to Cephas, and then he appeared to the 12, and then he appeared to 500 others. And so we wondered, well, how did that happen? How did he possibly know that? How could he possibly know that and preach that? There just has to be another letter. This is going to be my Galatians letter. In Galatians, who's on the list? Galatians is on the list. The first chapter, the 18th verse. Paul, which way did I have to go get to it, y'all? Wrong way? Wrong way? That'll work. We just want to see what he said. Like a cat. So Paul is saying after 3 years. What is talking about after what 3 years? This is in let's see. In Galatians, he's writing the letter to Galatians, to the people there. Everybody agrees he wrote it. Okay, don't forget that. All the scholars agree. I know I keep harping on that. But he says, after 3 years, which is 3 years after what? His conversion. I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas and stayed with him 15 days. That meeting took place in 40 AD. So he's talking to Cephas in 40 AD. And he's discussing what? The resurrection with Cephas, who is what? A first-hand account. Do you think he thought he could trust Peter? Do you think Peter's background was enough for him to trust him? Do you think he's an honest man? A first-hand account. And then that first-hand account, what were they getting together? Now you understand, Paul, this is 3 years after his experience. We don't know, based on our information here, exactly what happened to him. But something drastically changed his life. And he went from somebody who was persecuting, actually killing Christians, to preaching. Something happened. 3 years prior to this, 37 AD, 5 years. 5 years. Possibly 4. And then he talked to Peter, a first-hand account, and they talked about what? The resurrection. So what we have, we've got a man who all of them agree on. All the scholars agree. That a man was killed and executed by the Romans in 32 or 33 AD, named Jesus. 4 to 5 years after that, this man who's writing these letters that all scholars agree on had an experience. 3 years after that, he went to Cephas to find out and talk to him. In that short amount of time, first-hand accounts, everybody understands, everybody agrees. That's not too long to believe, is it? No. This is not a story that was passed down decade after decade after decade after decade and got embellished over and over and over. It just wasn't that way. Don't let anybody tell you that that's the truth, because it is not the truth. And if they do, you just whip out Paul and say, the problem that we get into sometimes when we have debates with people is most of the time, you rarely find somebody who wants to study and look through it and come to a real clear understanding. They have got a predetermined opinion, and they'll say, I just don't believe the Bible. That's the craziest thing. What do you mean? Which is it that you don't believe me? Was it this one or this one? This one? Was it the 13 letter? What is it you don't believe? I just don't believe that stuff. I'm sorry, that's just ignorant. I mean, in the truest sense of the word, that's just ignorance. There's just not, that they haven't taken the time to look and clearly study what we study and what we trust other people who do. I mean, all those other books and things, I trust the scholars that went ahead of me. 100%. Now, the other scholars don't. I can prove it wrong. Right? Can't we? Yes, we can. We can absolutely prove it. Paul's letter and his letters. Well, there's one more thing. How much time do we have? I've got 10 minutes. There's one more thing that I want to mention, and this is something that's really brand new to me, and I hope I can get it across enough. In that scripture that we were reading at the very beginning, that Paul wrote to the Corinthians, right? There was a portion of that the scholars believe was a creed, a portion of a creed, right? It was a creed is a statement that's carefully crafted to say exactly what they want to say, and it's crafted so that it can be memorable. It's crafted so that it has a meter and a rhythm to it, so that it can be easily remembered, because in that day, there weren't a lot of literate people. Most of them couldn't read. So things that were really important, they would come up with a creed, which was a saying. How many of you were in a church that repeated the Apostles' Creed? Right? So I grew up in a Methodist church, and I could probably repeat that before I could read. Because we said it every Sunday. And that's exactly what the creed is for. And there is even this is hard to believe, there is an atheist Bible scholar. That just blows my mind. His name is Dominic Crossan. He even agrees that this first portion of that letter, of that 15th chapter is a creed. And the creed, how can I say it? We do the ABCs. A, B, C, D, E. Why do we do that? Why do you teach your kids that? They can't read yet, can they? But they can sure remember it. I always wondered what an elementum was. You know, I said that thing so like elementum. What's an elementum? But it was a creed. And they said it over and over and over. So what does that mean? That means that during that time in 52 AD, that Paul was saying a creed that was already familiar to the people. They already understood. How could they possibly understand the creed that he was just sharing with them there? They had to have known previously from somewhere. It was widely recognized enough that they already knew the creed. You know, that we rearranged the words a little bit in that first part so that it makes more sense in English. But it would be like Christ died for our sins and was buried. He rose from the dead and was seen. Christ died for our sins and was buried. He rose from the dead and was seen. It was a little rhythm, a little meter, a little rhyme, so that they would understand. They already knew it. How did they know? It was widely recognized already that it was true. This wasn't something that was developed in 110 AD or in 200 or in the 4th century when whoever wrote the Bible wrote the Bible. Man. So maybe Paul was lying, right? Maybe he just made it all up as this real elaborate hoax. That's another thing that no scholar ever believes, that Paul lies in his letters. I thought that was interesting when I read that. Nobody ever believed it. And you know why they didn't believe it? Because what he believed and what he wrote was validated by his life. It was validated by how he lived his life, how he suffered like he did, all the things he went through, and he stood on it, and he stood on it, and said, this is truth. And what I laid out tonight is not proof that Jesus is the Son of God. It isn't. And I realize this is more kind of a grown-up, you know. I would never go through to some young kids and say, toss this book out, toss that one out. Never, ever would I do that. But I think you guys are grown up. And I think you understand where I'm going from. Paul's letter is evidence that people in Jerusalem who saw Jesus die. Let's think about this a minute. People in Jerusalem who saw Jesus die believed that he rose from the dead. The people who saw him die, not 100, 200 years later, after things were made up, the people who saw him die, and the letters prove it. Paul's letter is proof that the resurrection was not a product of decades-old oral transmission. His letter proves that belief in the resurrection was documented while all the eyewitnesses were still eyewitnesses. Proof. Don't let anybody tell you it's not. Don't let anybody tell you that, oh, nobody believes those things anymore. Because that's not true. And we can prove it. We can prove it if they'll dig for it. Right? If they'll dig for it. The Bible didn't create Christianity. It didn't even exist at that time. Christians didn't create Christianity either. The resurrection created Christianity. Nothing but a resurrection could create such an incredible amount of courage in men who watched their leader suffer and die, run away from acknowledging it. 2 days later, having the boldness and courage to walk up to the very people, the Romans who put their leader to death, and say, I believe. The resurrection is the only thing that can do that to people. And honestly, y'all, it's the only thing in our life that can do it for us. To be able to stand on that same thing, on these same letters, the same information, the same knowledge that we've got, and say, oh no,